Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everyone, ladies, gentlemen, and our non-binary friends. Welcome to our UWIHARP's Sexual Health Dialogues. I'm Monique Springer, Project Officer with UWIHARP, and I'm joined today with Ms. Keelan Anderson, our Project Assistant, and Mr. Samuel Eugene, a technician from UWI's Classroom Technology. Both will be providing some technical support for us. A very special welcome to our students, staff members, off-campus partners, repeat visitors, and to our new guests. UWIHARP is the HIV Sexual Health Unit at UWI, and we seek to positively influence the sexual and reproductive health and wellness of the university population and the wider Caribbean society. Our primary focus is the development of sexual health literacy among the community through programs such as our digital dialogues. These are informal sexual health conversations and will be held during the semester. They include the S-Files discussion series on a wide range of topics and the Shock series, which will focus on sexual health issues among our vulnerable Caribbean populations during COVID-19. You can look out for the flyers on our social media platforms, which include Facebook, Instagram, and the UWI app, and also through UWI emails. There are a few participation guidelines and notices. All mics are muted and videos are turned off. Q&A will take place after the presentations and the mics will be unmuted as needed. We ask you to post your questions or comments during the presentation in the Q&A chat pod located at the bottom of the screen. We aim to address as many as possible at the end of the presentation. For those questions we couldn't get to, please email them to uwiharp@kphil.uwi.edu before the end of the day, and we will address them shortly afterwards. The sessions will be recorded and the recordings will be posted afterwards on our social media platforms, including our YouTube channel, UWIHARP Cave Hill. These will be done without sensitive personal discussions to protect participants' confidentiality. Please note that we cannot guarantee confidentiality in this public forum among participants. So be cautious about what personal information you disclose about yourself and others. It's safer to talk in general terms. Please complete the evaluation form that will be sent to you immediately after the session. You can suggest topics that you're interested in for us to facilitate. There are a few rules, some of which were adapted from the HIV 2020 online for our discussion. UWIHARP's digital dialogues provide a safe space to address a range of sexual health topics using a sex-positive approach. We encourage participants to share their knowledge, experiences, and opinions in a respectful manner. You may disagree with views highlighted today. However, please be respectful of other outlooks, regardless of your religious or moral beliefs. Let us be mindful in the way we discuss sensitive topics. UWIHARP operates on a zero tolerance policy for any kind of abusive, discriminatory, belligerent, or disparaging comments or actions that may cause distress to presenters and or participants. Persons who engage in any undesirable behaviors will be immediately removed from the webinar unannounced. UWIHARP follows the first do no harm guiding principle. At today's discussion, or S-File discussion, we'll be looking at grassroots women's NGOs and reproductive justice and their role in reproductive justice. And just a little bit about International Women's Day. It got started in 1917, that is, with the women's suffragette protests in Russia. And this day was then formally observed by the United Nations in 1975 as an occasion to celebrate women's achievement. The 2021 theme is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World. The sub-theme, Choose to Challenge, acknowledges that women have always been change agents through challenging patriarchal, racist ideologies and practices. Today, we will hear from two outstanding Caribbean women who have been change agents in their communities for women, and especially in the context of reproductive justice. Some framing thoughts for today's talk. I looked at Winnie Byanyima, who's the UN AIDS Executive Director, and in her press release, she noted that pandemics such as COVID-19 and HIV magnify the fissures in society and exacerbates vulnerabilities. Gender-based and intersecting inequalities and violence hold back the lives of women and girls all over the world. And we will look at some of these issues today. I'd like to introduce our presenters now. First, we have Ms. Taitu Heron. She's a Jamaican and a development specialist, trainer, facilitator, human rights advocate, and poet. She's a graduate of UWIMONA and the University of Cambridge, UK, in international relations in Spanish and development studies, respectively. Her professional experience spans academia, civil society, civil service, and international development, working in the fields of Caribbean development and human rights for almost 2 decades in the Caribbean, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. Her competencies include project management, rights and evidence-based policymaking, and development planning, applied research management, gender and human rights training, and multiple stakeholder partnership building and engagement. She is currently head of the Women and Development Unit WAND of UWI's Open Campus. We also have Ms. Michelle Irvin, a Belizean community worker, advocate, and human rights defender for over 25 years. In 2019, she received the MBE Award in recognition of her community work with POWER, Productive Organization for Women in Action, the organization she coordinates and co-founded in 2003. POWER is a peer education community-based women's group that support women and girls to live without violence and discrimination. POWER's work is based on principles of respect, human rights, and equity to combat the spread of HIV, violence against women, and sexual and reproductive health and rights. POWER is one of the women's groups that pioneered advocacy and support for LGBT rights, especially lesbian and bisexual women. Now, to begin with, I thought we could start with a definition of reproductive justice. And in essence, it combines reproductive rights and social justice. It's defined as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. And this comes from Sister Song, Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. The term reproductive justice is a coin termed in 1994 by women of African descent for reproductive justice. And reproductive justice focuses on intersecting factors of race, gender, class, nationality, and sexuality that disproportionately impact on different groups of marginalized women. And now I'd like to start the conversation with asking both Michelle and Taitu this one question. Tell us about your work in sexual reproductive health and reproductive rights and the communities you work with, and why reproductive justice is important. And Taitu, I think we will start with you.
Okay. I started working in sexual and reproductive health and rights when I was actually working at the Planning Institute of Jamaica in the early 2000s. This is in the mid 2000s rather, after I had left Cave Hill and had gone back to Jamaica. And at the time I was a manager of the social development and gender unit. And that department was responsible for also liaising with NGOs to engage in public policy dialogue and so on. But while I was a civil servant, I was also a member of Women's Media Watch and Caribbean Dawn. So when there was beginning, they had brought back on the agenda, I think for the first time since the 70s, the abortion law reform, the need for abortion law reform in Jamaica. I got involved at that intersection of both while working at my day job as a civil servant, as a development planner and policy analyst, and also as a coordinator with Caribbean Dawn, along with Danielle Topping, who actually is Barbadian, but she's back here. She's back here now. That's how I know Danielle Topping.
Okay.
So, and Danielle was the gender specialist with Sister Theatre Collective at the time. So it was at that intersection that I got involved in ensuring that Sister Theatre Collective and Caribbean Dawn were engaged in the policy debates that the government was having and contributing to the discussion for abortion law reform. It started there, and one of the things that I remember very well about that is the inclusion of Sistren as a grassroots organization in the whole joint select committee and the discussion that went on afterwards. They actually performed a skit in Parliament, doing basically outlining, or I should say demonstrating using theater, what was happening to Jamaican women, grassroots women from the inner city, with regards to poor access to safe and affordable abortion, and the fact that it was illegal and the impact on their lives and so on. So that was actually monumental, because it was the first time that theater was used as a submission to Parliament and considered as a submission to Parliament. So in addition to the written submission, we did through engaging with Sistren, we were able to do the theatrical submission. So that was the first. That was actually my I guess you could say my baptism of fire, because prior to that, my interest was more in broad-based gender studies and policy work with gender-based violence and so on. And I just continued from there in various professional spaces, just expanded it a bit more as I grew professionally and personally. I don't remember what the second part of the question was. Okay, unmute, Monique.
Yeah, epic failure. Why reproductive justice is important in the communities that you've worked with?
Absolutely. That actually has evolved. I started out more focusing primarily, or singularly rather, on reproductive health and rights. But it was just my own evolution over time, particularly as I started to branch off and do work with the LGBTQ community, that I began to see the different ways in which we needed to have intersection and have a broader understanding of other women and their reproductive rights, and the way it also intersected with class, with disability, with location, geographical location. Yeah. So it needed a much more broader focus rather than just specifically rights, because there were other things that were, for want of a better word, interfering. And once you got to that level, you had to expand the base of communities that you're then working with. So it was pretty much from there. And then over the years, it evolved a little further to include spiritual aspects of reproductive justice, which I am framing as the healing of the womb. But we'll get to that when we get to discussion, and I want to hear Michelle know.
Yeah. Okay, so we pick up on some of those, Taitu, because I really would like to hear more of the details of some of the work that you've been doing, especially like Tamarind Army and some of the other NGOs that you've been working with, you were working with in Jamaica, around the areas of reproductive justice. So some specifics then after we hear back from Michelle, and then we can go back and forth.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for that, Taitu. Michelle, then I'm going to invite you then to now share with us your work in sexual reproductive health and reproductive rights, and also why reproductive justice is important.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Monique and Taitu. Thanks for sharing. I really enjoy listening to some of the experiences that you shared just now. And for myself, my introduction to sexual reproductive health and rights and along the continuum of justice, reproductive justice, is the portal was HIV. I Belize at the time, was #1 in Central America as it relates to HIV positive people dying from AIDS. At the time when I became involved, there wasn't any medication, there weren't any treatments, we had children, women, people were, it was as a death sentence. And not only was it a death sentence, but also we were losing our sense of community in the way we were taking care of others, because I think we were feeling not sure if we would be able to catch the disease, how you catch it, all that. And so people were dying in isolation, needing care. And so the whole sense of community, was disjointed and working. I work as a civil servant, and I work at the women's department. And working at the women's department, there was a group of people who were concerned and said, let's come together and let's represent and see how we could conduct a project. And we started to look at, because in our area, we were noticing what we were calling the feminization of HIV. While HIV was it seemed that the trajectory was mostly men, more men infected than women, but we started to see in our spaces, and we started to see more women become infected. And so we decided to, in about 2002, along with some other partners, to go ahead and write a project and have an activity where we would have been able to bring women together, because we were concerned about the feminization of HIV, and talk to them about, negotiating condoms, usage, assertive behavior, communication, and topics like that, like to start off to say women taking control, so to speak, of their sexual health, in the context of HIV. And so we held these workshops on weekends, retreats and workshop. And I was invited to facilitate at the workshop as a women's development officer, communication, assertive behavior, empowerment type facilitation. And while I was facilitating, the questions just kept coming from the women and coming from the women and coming from the women. And I realized that, people are so hungry for this education and this information. And so I told them, okay, I'll give up my Saturdays and I will meet with you, on the veranda of the department, so you guys could come, just continue to discourse. And that's how Power was born. Out of that, then the need was so strong for women to come together. It was an organic just movement, just women saying, I need this information and I will share this information. And they brought their friends and they brought their sisters, and some of them brought their mothers. And so they came for us to share and to talk. And so then we said, well, we have to go into the community then, because if we didn't know all of this information, people out there don't know this information either. And people are dying because they don't know the information. They don't know much about, their sexual health. They don't know much about, people are having sex, but they don't know about it. They're just doing it because they feel that is what they're supposed to do. They have absolutely no control over their bodies and over what will be happening to them as it relates to how, when, where, as we talk about sexual rights. And so we started to use different methodology, just being creative. We didn't know anything about funding, about nothing. We just went into the community, and as we learned, we share. As we learn, we share. And we used to take certain neighborhoods, street by street. Two women would go down that street, another two down another street, another two down another street. And then we would culminate at a little area, like a little park or a bus stop or something. And then we would discuss what we found in the streets and then see how we could refer to services and things like that. So just starting to learn and starting then to see the challenges that women were having, see the way they were made to feel when they tried to access services, the difficulty sometimes that they had, because the shame that was associated with sexuality and sex. And so many people were not able to speak about it. People didn't want to seek public service. Some people wanted maybe the service to be in their neighborhood, or some people even wanted it to be in their home, because there were sometimes girls that were sexually abused who may be HIV positive. And there was this huge issue around confidentiality, trying to access the public spaces and to get help or to get support. So people were dying from, I would say, from shame, because they didn't want to be dehumanized during the process in trying to find help. And so, we even developed the methodology of escorting to services, that we would go with them when they needed service. We say, okay, don't worry, I will go with you, I'll come for you, or we'll meet you at a certain time and we will go if you want us to go, And so sometimes we became like support for persons just to access HIV tests, just to access, sometimes now we still do just even for women to access birth control if that's what they want. And so, or to access looking at emergency contraception or termination of pregnancy, or sometimes even pap smear, because there is such a fear or breast around our entire reproductive health. There is such a fear, there is such a lack of knowledge also, that it's very, 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 it takes a huge, like people would be taking a huge risk to seek health and to seek services. So we wanted to kind of normalize that conversation. And so we did a lot of different approaches to say, how do we as a community talk about this? And so, like Sistrine and like Taitu talked about, we did drama. We did drama in the streets. We did drama in churches when we went to bury our loved ones, and we moved from where there was total silence about this, there was total lack of knowledge, to where people started to say, well, I need to be responsible for myself. I need to find condoms. I need to do this. I need to do that. And so we use a completely organic grassroots approach, where we just creatively try to solve the problems within the communities, and trying to look at the uniqueness of different communities. Belize is a multicultural society, with culture being a strong sense of identity for people. And so it is when we do the work, we need to understand, okay, if a Garfuna woman is saying something, what does that mean? Opposed to a Maya woman saying something, what does that mean? And so then we have to be able to then tailor or support them in the context of their cultural reality, because at the end of the day, that's their life, and that is where they are and where they're living. So those are some of the startup that we have.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle, for that. I'm going to come back to ask you a little bit about the women in your organization. If you can maybe paint a picture of who these women are, where they come from, age groups, kind of thing. And I'm going to ask Taitu to do the same, if you can, to some of the groups that you worked with in Jamaica. If you can maybe tell us a little bit about the women and girls that were part of your different societies and organizations that you worked with.
All right, I guess I'll start.
Yeah, I'll let you start, and then I'll go back to Michelle.
The early work when I was at the Planning Institute was primarily with Caribbean Dawn, and Caribbean Dawn basically had regional roots as well, starting with Peggy Anthropos' work. And then I had taken over as the coordinator, the regional coordinator at that time, while I had the job, the government job.
Wow.
But anywho, and so we include, as part of Caribbean Dawn, included Aspire from Trinidad, and CAFRA in Trinidad, as well as CAFRA in St. Lucia at the time. And they had also made contributions and submissions to the government of Jamaica, the Joint Select Committee. In terms of on the ground in Jamaica, we had formulated a committee, the Women's Reproductive Health and Rights Committee, which encompassed various NGOs in Jamaica. who were grassroots led, and others that were, I would say, middle class / heteronormative led. So it included a combination of both types of organizations. So we had the Women's Resource Center, which is grassroots oriented, led by Lynette Vassell at the time. And then Sistren Theatre Collective, which was led by Lana Finnegan at the time. And out of Sistren, we had the Hannahtown Collective, which was an inner city cultural group that used to do a lot of street theater around women's rights, along with Sistren. My memory fails me, there were at least 2 more NGOs that were engaged at the time. It took Women's Media Watch, which is, I don't know how I forgot, but that is the first NGO I joined when I was at UA. And the other one it will come to me in a minute. But in terms of the grassroots, most of the women that were involved from the grassroots level, unfortunately, were, well, it's a good thing, but it's just that in hindsight, it could have been more expansive. It was primarily in urban grassroots women, I would say. So, and we still suffer from that in Jamaica in terms of how we look at the advocacy and how we look at sexual reproductive health and rights, and that kind of advocacy work that has to take place. It's still pretty much dominated by and the urban environment. And so there's not enough engagement with what is happening in the rural areas and rural women.
Oh, okay.
And that is still the case. And then at the, I guess you could say, at the other level, you'd have other organizations which were middle class led and would have taken, in a more self-appointed kind of way, traditionally, charge of the technical aspects of the work, you know, engaging with parliamentarians, meeting with other leaders and shakers like church leaders and so on, engaging with ministers, not that it couldn't include them, but that's just how it evolved. And then at the time, being in the middle of it, while it came up in the discussion, we didn't necessarily find a more integrated way of resolving some of those kinds of class tensions within the advocacy. The reach at the time, I would say it was between girls who were in their early 20s and women up to women up to their 40s, 50s, right? Across class, across, not so much across orientation yet at that time, or gender identity. Those things, the women's movement in Jamaica had not evolved beyond the heteronormative framework in those days. So I would say that would be the composition in a sense, yeah. And then one of the interesting things that came out of it is that because Sistren played such a central role in ensuring the holding of space of the experience of the grassroots woman theater and drumming, and a kind of a cyclical, circular approach to advocacy, we were able to demonstrate once we held the space in Parliament. So I'll give you an example. Whenever, not just in Parliament, but whenever we had to go out and engage with the public, we used the theater piece. And the entrance was always grand with drums, you know, just drumming to start the play and then drumming while the songs were singing. So it was always a way that not only engaged the public, but I would say shook or shifted energy that sometimes can create a lot of tension and stagnation over something as supposedly controversial as abortion and other aspects of women's reproductive health. I personally don't understand why it is controversial. You know, it's very basic, you know, you're a woman, these are certain things that you're gonna need. But we can talk about the root of that controversy as the discussion goes on. But I would say in a nutshell, that would be it. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Taitu. Mish, I'm going to pass over to you now to maybe to paint that picture of your community members. And then I
Right.
really want to pick up this conversation, one about the tensions between the communities working with reproductive health and justice, and also the conversation on abortion in both countries. So
Okay.
I'll let you go ahead and tell us about your profile.
So we've been doing this since 2003 or about before, but we had to peg down a date for writing something. So we decided it was May 2003. It was not that, but you know, we pegged that date. So but our audience were basically urban in the town where I am living. Where the office was, is, and the profile was, I would say, 25, age 25, you know, women at that age, women in Belize and maybe in the rest of the Caribbean, but have children early. So by the time you're 25, you may have had 3 or 4 children already. And so there were women with children. And we had people who were members of the lesbian community. As a matter of fact, that was some of our, the way how we were shamed, I guess, if you could say it that way, if you want to say it that way, that we were, you know, a bunch of lesbians, you know. I remember one person saying there are a bunch of uneducated women, which we were, because, you know, if you say education by academic creds, there wasn't much of that, you know. And so most of the women didn't even finish high school. So they were only able to go up to primary school because high school is so expensive in Belize, you know. They were not able to do that. In fact, many of the women finished high school because they were in power in our organization. And we worked with the town council at the time to have a night school. And the mayor, you know, we started, and then we won a grant, our Red Ribbon Award, and we used the money to support women to go back to school. And so women were able to then finish their high school, and some of them were able to go on to go to what we call college, you know, sixth form, right? Which is the highest education level we have in our community, right? So that was the demographic profile. Many of the women were HIV positive themselves, or they were victims of domestic violence. Women were even, suffered domestic violence from wanting to be in the group, from wanting to be associated. Their partners, you know, we had partners who would come up and, you know, stalk. We had partners who were stalkers, and we had to sometimes have circle around women, you know, and say that's not what happened, yeah, and, you know, and fight with their partners for them, and those kinds of things. And so it was quite a real community group. And we used to do the same thing. We use culture. We are in a predominantly Garfuna community. And so we use Garfuna song, dance, drumming, and you know, it's also I would say like a form of psychological support as well. You know, using our thing that grounds us and roots, give us roots. And so we use a lot of that in terms of being able to express what we were doing. But what we did is that we also went into the rural communities. So we would plan on which community we would go in. We would mobilize, organize, and then we would set up shops in the different villages or in the different communities. And so while we were urban based, we would ensure that we take the services and the information to rural communities. You know, we network with, for example, Belize Family Life Association from the onset, and we would take both information and services to the rural, because, for example, the rural women would tell us that when the services from the government would come, they would go and take the pap smear, just for example, but they would never get the results. That's a useless venture, right? And so you would never know you're taking a pap smear to look at cervical cancer. So people would, if you don't get the results, if you need some treatment, you could die from not getting your results. And so we started to ensure that didn't happen, and that we would definitely go back or move mountains to ensure that we get those results to them, be it normal or not. And so because it's a form of respect also. So that's the profile. And then we gradually said as a group of women that, you know what, we have gone through all these experiences, and it's best that we start to look at our girls and then to start to work with girls. And so that when girls become women, you know, they don't have to go through probably the same learning curve like we did. They would have been brought up in the movement, so to speak. And it's also a form of, you know, sustaining, you know, the movement and looking at how do we then continue to do the work. And we will continue to do the work through our girls and boys if they are interested in doing that. So we use a lot of the draw is the culture for us to sing, for us to dance, for us to learn songs, for us to learn our history, and then for us to then talk about some of the other topics that are viewed to be tabooed. And like Taitu said, I don't know why, but that's the word we have interrogated. We kind of know why, but it's not for us to discuss the why here. It's just for us to understand where we are now and how do we change that now. So that's our profile.
Great, thank you so much for that, Michelle. And if you can maybe explain to our participants who are here, who may not be familiar with the Garfuna, if you can maybe tell us a little bit about the Garfuna population. Okay, as history has, you know, has told us, the Garfuna Kalinago people that were here, indigenous people that were here before Columbus, and some school of thought, even Black people that were here before Columbus. And after Columbus and after the enslavement of Africans that were brought here, people in Dominica, St. Vincent, you know, and the Grenadines, a lot of times they form maroon communities with indigenous people, and a new, you say, culture appear where they had the merger of Africans and indigenous Caribbean people. And after a while, the British, they lost the war to the French and the British. It was constant fighting over their home. And so they were exiled to Rotan over this side. And from Rotan, they moved on to Belize, Honduras, Guatemala. Rotan is in Honduras. They moved on to Belize, Guatemala. And so this vibrant group of people that hold both indigenous Caribbean knowledge and African knowledge, you know, is predominantly Dangriga. Dangriga is also a Garfuna word for the community that I live in. And so our entire experiences, you know, can be looked at, because it's also, we have to also remember there's also a level of, I would say, like, discrimination, again, ethnic discrimination, from not being part of the dominant culture. And like there were two African groups, the Creole, so to speak, and the Garfuna, so to speak. And then, you know, with the British interference, they were always pitted against each other, because I do believe that if the groups would be together, they would create quite a hell. And the Garfuna was very feared because of the fierce fighting for their land and for their rights in St. Vincent. And so, you are looking at also, one of the intersections is also vulnerability based on your ethnic group and also the location of where you live, because the Garfuna
had to live in the South because there was a type of apartheid that was imposed upon them when they came to Belize. It was because of the war in Honduras, and when they came to Belize and asked for shelter, they met the British governor and they said, "Oh my God, not you people again." And so they tell them, "Well, go south of this moon, like the tigers are going to eat you, so we won't see you anyway. And you can't come up to the city, and you can't stay overnight. And if you come to sell your ware, you just have to go before nightfall, that kind of thing. You have to get a pass and things like that." And so, so that's the history. So you have, so I guess that is important, because you have to also see the the vulnerability that is attached to ethnicity. So service, access to service, language, you know, and that kind of thing have also, I mean, no, things are changing, but it just thinking about the experiences and to see themselves as it relates to their, you know, their position in development in the country, in communities.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Michelle. And I think we're going to come back to that. You know, that time is ticking on, but I wanted to maybe address the issue around abortion first, and then looking at the tensions between groups of women who are working in reproductive health that Taitu mentioned. And I wanted to see maybe if what Michelle also has to say, if there were any of those experiences. But I think first, I'd like to hear about abortion, maybe abortion laws, access to abortion in both countries, because that is very much what a lot of reproductive rights programs really started out with, looking at access to abortion. I think it is important for us to be able to do that. Taitu, if you're there, I'll let you start.
I'm here.
Yeah, okay. With access to abortion in Jamaica and the legal frameworks around abortion in Jamaica, if you can.
Yeah, the abortion in Jamaica is covered under the two provisions in the Offences Against the Persons Act, the same piece of legislation that was enacted by our former colonizers in 1864, that pretty much was the same law across the English-speaking Caribbean. And it is still there on the books. And there have been at least four attempts over the decades to have the law changed. Women's access to abortion exists in this category of unlawful procurement. But at the same time, it does not define what is lawful procurement of an abortion. And it also punishes medical practitioners who seek to help a woman to have an abortion. So
okay, so just for clarification, abortion in Jamaica is illegal.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. In the strictest term, I would say yes. You can argue for it being unlawful because apparently there are conditions under which it can be done, like to save the life of a woman, but you have to prove it, and to prove it alone, she probably would have died by the time they proved
right.
it. So, to be frank, so for all intents and purposes, it is illegal, and it has from ever since. So that was the entry point a very, very long time ago. And even now, as we're speaking, there has been quite a bit of intense debate about abortion law reform. The debate has intensified again because this is at least the fourth iteration.
Okay.
You know, and nothing has happened. And the voice of the church, the religious right in particular, has been loud. And
Yes,
there's an extent to which I would want to say the extent to which a certain brand of Christianity that I call imperial Christianity has a mental hold on political spaces in Jamaica, in governance, in law reform in general, in policy spaces, that persons are not necessarily able to separate their religious affiliation, their religious ideological affiliation to their role in public policy for the public good, and being able to integrate the notion that women as citizens are valid members of the public.
Yeah.
But every other public, not every other. So in other words, in very patriarchal terms, only some publics deserve protection under the law. And I'm putting it crudely, but when we really get down to the realities, that is really what the outcomes are
I
showing.
was actually liking how you phrased it, but yeah.
You know? Yeah, you know, so when you look at the reality, that is what we see: discrimination against a certain group of women, and then discrimination against a certain kind of sexuality, and then discrimination
Right.
in other ways. So it's complicated in that regard. And at the heart of it is citizenship.
Yeah.
It is citizenship. How does the state value your life? And how can the laws reflect how they value your life? So, you know, we just have to look at the reality of the impact of the law, and that really demonstrates how they value your life. So for me, the point of how that has evolved for me has I've been able to expand my notion of reproductive justice, and in a Caribbean-centered sense, by having what I call the 3 pillars: harm, heal, or help. And the way in which it is couched now, it is in the framework of harm. And this harm has been enacted by law since the 1800s, and it has not changed, right? And so even though we ourselves may recognize our own sovereignty as women, right? And we do exercise autonomy over our bodies. The problem is that where the harm happens is that there is unnecessary and often cruel hurdles and obstacles that women have to face when they seek to navigate pregnancies that they don't wish to keep as a result of personal circumstances. So that has caused harm. It is an environment of harm.
Yeah.
So and then in addition to that kind of framework, there's a whole lot of psychological, social, emotional, and economic impact that has happened. That also is harm. At the level of energy, or at the level of multi-generational transfer of trauma, that has also caused harm. So, and then when you look at it with us coming out of a history of genocide, of slavery, of indentured servitude, with our varied social, sexual, and spiritual and ethnic complexities, we have an interaction with the state that is pretty much grounded, and still is grounded, in discrimination, violence, and privilege at those intersections, right?
Yeah.
So it affects our experience as citizens, right? So even if we know, say, we're bright, we're creative, we have capacity, and we can do things, right? The environment of harm creates another context that I think we really need when we're seeking reproductive justice in our context, has to be considered. So it's like harm is then taken to mean something or someone or an institution like the state that causes or facilitates adverse health effects on someone and affects the quality of their life and how they experience being a citizen of that country, right? So for me, this harm is centuries old, it is multi-generational, and it continues to have colonial patterns of behavior. In terms of how we navigate the state and how the state treats us, I should say. The other one then is, so if we have harm, right? And I haven't even gone on to talk about the harm that the church causes, but that is probably for another debate. Because when I talk about church, I follow my mother. My mother say you have 2 things. You have imperial Christianity or churchianity, and then you have ancient Christianity. Because my mother is a Rastafarian and she follows a trajectory of of Christianity that goes right back to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So you have imperial Christianity or churchianity, and you have ancient Christianity, right? We are trapped with the dominance of imperial Christianity, and that influences the policy debate, and it contributes to the environment of harm towards women and LGBTQ people, right? Yeah. And children, everybody. We won't go there today, right?
Taitu, thank you so much for that. I'm watching the time, and
Yes,
believe it or not, we're getting on to 2 o'clock. And I wanted to hear from Michelle about the situation with access to abortion in Belize. If if abortions are legal, and if not, how do women navigate around accessing these services for unintended pregnancies?
I think if you ask most people in Belize, they would tell you that abortion is illegal. And that is because there is conditions to have an abortion, but there are actually 3 conditions: the health of the mother, the health of the child, and oddly enough, your economic ability to take care of the child. That's one of the conditions. So what we as advocates do is to then teach people the law and say, your health. And when we talk about health, it's your mental health as well as your physical health. So many times, if you can say, I don't want to keep this pregnancy, you go to a counselor, you discuss what are the reasons, the counselor sign off on it, then you can have the procedure. Of course, there are restrictions of time and, weeks and things like that. Again, if you can then say, I can't afford this, and through the same counsel, you could talk about your economic situation, your inability to keep the pregnancy, or because of your financial situation. And so those are the conditions. Now, like I said, but traditionally, we would go through some of the same things that I do already spoke about. So it's the same kind of culture, and then that is also, you would say, reinforced by, for example, even close to Jamaican culture and the songs about abortion and about, looking at women as really being criminal and causing a lot of harm. First, I used to say with a nice strong belly, where you eat soup, and things like this that are very, very negative. And so then that creates another subculture that, that really says that, no, this is a no, and so, but people who really want to do it, you have to really give a lot of support again as well. And so we have had experiences where, you have to bring people in from the rural, you have to support with transportation, sometimes with food, and those kinds of things to ensure, and not only to say you have the continued psychosocial support. And so that's our advocacy, and to let people know that, you can do it if you want to do it. And so, and that's a point to also to the state to understand that, this is a need that people have, and it is a right for you to ensure that their need is respected, because at the end of the day, when you choose to carry a pregnancy, you will have to be the one responsible for your body, everything that you're going to go through. And so then we should then also go ahead and make sure that we respect and cause no harm. So it's kind of the same thing, although I think in Belize and in certain spaces, we would have a little bit more of a ability to get it done more than what I would have explained in Jamaica, but it's not a perfect, just go ahead and, post it on. Yeah, so.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And Kelia, are there any questions? I have my last question.
No, I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay, thanks. Taitu raised the issue of tensions between the grassroots women working in reproductive justice and the middle class women working in reproductive justice. And I wanted to maybe touch on that a little bit, Taitu, if you'll be able to expand, because you said, for what I remember, that, these tensions weren't very clear as to why they happened. Can you maybe expand a little bit on that?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just want to make sure my mic was on.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, I think the first, to me, the important distinction that I noted after a while, after a couple of years, is that the mainstream conversation in advocacy is around reproductive rights, whereas the grassroots approach to it is centered around reproductive justice.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas,
yep.
But I think the rights framework is kind of individualistic, you know, and it focuses on the legal system, and therefore it revolves largely on the pro-choice and pro-life
right.
sex education and family planning. Whereas the reproductive justice approach now pays a lot more attention, and this is where the contribution of the grassroots women and also in the discussions for instance, on Indigenous women in Canada, what they have contributed to the debate is that you also have to pay attention to the socioeconomic status, gender, race, and spirituality. And these things, coupled with the patriarchal and ideological hegemony of the narrative, in a sense, shapes reproductive healthcare experiences. So to me, that is the key distinction. The rights framework is individualistic and legal, while the reproductive justice framework is more expansive, intersectional, and holistic. Yeah.
Right, great. Thank you so much for that. That's certainly what I have come across in the works on reproductive justice coming out of the global north, those very same conversations that you're having, how it started in reproductive health and rights with access to abortion, but reproductive justice, just taking it further, looking at these different levels of marginalization and intersectionalities of marginalized women and how they impact on their access to and experiences around reproductive well-being and reproductive health and justice. Michelle, what about you? Have you
I definitely see that way. I see reproductive justice moving along the continuum. We continue to go, looking at communities, looking at intersections, looking at what the needs, the specific needs of different groups are, how they see themselves and how they want to express and reflect that in the context of justice and rights as well. And so it's moving along the continuum. I think that a lot of times, you know, we in the Caribbean, we just because of our global experiences, and sometimes we have to redefine what our experiences are, what our realities are, because what is certain groups, especially if it's majority groups and you're spinning off of that imperial colonialist westernized Christianized mentality, it's quite different from when you start to redefine your own who you are, what you want in your life, and what your rights are, and what justice is to ensure that that happens for you as a group, as a collective group of people, regardless of where you belong in terms of the intersections. Because what happened is people who, you don't have, I always tell people, I say, you know, rich people picnic, talking in our get pregnant at the same level of poor people picnic. But you will see, but they will go to Miami and get their abortion, or go to wherever they need to go and do whatever they have to do. I said, but then you see this now as a poor problem because, oh, they say they have picnic, why they have so much picnic, and that they only contribute to poverty. But you don't see them as a group and the lack of ability they have they experiment the same way with the other, but your class background, your ability to do for, you know, your ability to have money to do certain things, and then you play like you're so pious, and then you look down and say, well, oh, that's their problem down there, but it's the same issue, exactly the same people do the same things, no matter how much money they have or not have, but it only gets heightened because you're able to hide and the next one is not able to.
Exactly. And that's, thank you so much for that, Michelle. One of the things that have also come up in looking at reproductive justice, not only is having access to abortion, but also for women, especially poor women, especially marginalized women, women living with HIV, women living with disabilities, women, Black and brown women, we're looking in the US, who have the right to have the child that they want, because of things that have been coming up like forced sterilization, forced abortions, things like that. But I also, in closing, and I'll give you to just an opportunity to say your final remarks. I wanted to maybe just expand on the idea then of reproductive justice, you know, coming from the literature. And it says that reproductive justice focuses not just on access to abortion, but also on other SRH issues affecting the lives of women, trans people of color, including access to contraception, comprehensive sexuality education, prevention and care for STIs, alternative birth options, adequate prenatal and pregnancy care, domestic violence assistance, adequate wages to support families and safe houses and safe homes. And reproductive justice is based on the International Human Rights Framework, which views reproductive rights as human rights. And I think, you know, we just started this conversation today, and I think we still have so much more to do. So we have to go so much further in looking at reproductive justice in the Caribbean. But I know that there are lots of groups that have been doing this work, and you know, it's important to hear from them what their challenges have been, what their successes have been, and how we can move forward to achieving reproductive justice across the region. So I'll give this opportunity now then to the two of you to your last remarks, and then we'll close the session today. Taitu?
Okay, I think there was a question that we had asked, why, you know, why does this happen to women, you know, or persons with wombs? And the answer that I have come up with is the mystery of the blood. We all bleed every month. And the blood, because we bleed every month between a certain time in our life cycle, it is our connection to nature that men don't have. And ever since there was a conflation of midwifery and witchcraft, right? Women's wombs have been on the attack in various ways. So this is thousands of years old, right? But to me, the root is right there, right there. And the root of patriarchy is right there. This fear or not understanding the mystery of the blood and the fact that women had power over everything that came forth from the blood after that, whether it's menstruation, pregnancy, everything that is related to being a woman from the womb, so to speak. So I would say that the good thing that can come out of looking at it from a Caribbean perspective is to look at what, again, from what grassroots women have been able to contribute is the alternative ways in which women have had to exercise agency over their wombs in a harmful environment, yeah, from slavery until now. There are records, there's a book I started reading, I have contesting bodies, that talks about what happened under slavery and indentureship to women when they wanted to have babies and when they wanted to terminate, and the different ranges of natural remedies and so on that worked. Now, because there's been Western hegemony over medicine, that also gets pushed under and hasn't been as developed. It's no alternative, right? Yeah. And, midwifery is alternative. It's outside of the frame of what is considered a proper way to deliver a child. C-sections are now considered safer, or there's this push towards having cesarean sections when a woman is pregnant, negating the fact that women's bodies were naturally made for childbirth. So shifting it from the woman to doctor-centeredness in healthcare, right? So all of those various issues, I think we need to bring in from a Caribbean perspective, because the data is there. The folklore is there. The experiences are there, but it is not part of the larger conversation of over what ideology is mainstream over our legal framework and over our health policies.
Yeah.
I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you so much. That sounds like we can have another webinar on that alone. But I'm not sure, anyway.
Yeah, and
I will leave that there.
The ones who burned the witches are still the ones.
You know that's where it was going.
They're not talking about why the witches were burnt, but they're saying basically is the ones who were not asking about the ones who were burning the witches. We're still here talking about the witches that were burnt, but just in this century.
Yeah.
It's all back to the blood, man.
That's right. Thank you so much, Taitu. And Michelle, your last words?
I just ditto what Taitu said. I mean, we are in the work, it's the same spirit, it seems, and so there's really not much more to add. So it's just for us to continue to reclaim our spaces, understand the power of the blood. And so that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you also, Taitu. I'd also like to thank our attendees that came, and thanks to Kelia and Samuel for giving us technical support, and hope we will see you soon on our next webinar. Remember to fill out the evaluation form, and the webinar will be posted on our social media platforms. Goodbye, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.